Millionaire found his son hugging the black maid. She was family who told you to touch him. The voice cracked through the marble halls like a whip. 6-year-old Ethan Crawford froze mid-laugh, his small arms still wrapped around the black maid who had just lifted him from the floor after he tripped. The woman's name was Ruth Daniels, a kind-faced, middle-aged cleaner who had worked at the Crawford mansion for only 2 months. Her uniform was plain, her posture humble, but in that moment, standing beneath the grand staircase, she looked small, like a storm had turned its eyes on her. I'm sorry, sir," Ruth stammered softly, setting Ethan down gently. He fell. "I was just helping. You were hugging my son," snapped Alexander Crawford, the billionaire hotel magnate known for his cold perfectionism. His voice echoed through the gold-tiled foyer. The butler and 2 maids froze nearby, unsure if they should even breathe. Ethan tugged on his father's sleeve. "She was helping me, Daddy." Alexander didn't look at his child. His gaze burned into Ruth instead. "I don't pay you to get comfortable in my home." Ruth swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, sir. My apologies. Go back to work," he said sharply. "And keep your distance from my family." Ruth lowered her eyes. "Yes, Mr. Crawford." She turned away quietly, but before she disappeared into the hallway, Ethan ran after her and hugged her again. Quick, innocent, defiant. "Thank you, Miss Ruth," he whispered. Ruth froze. For the briefest second, something flickered in her eyes. Sorrow. Deep and old. Then she smiled and gently patted his cheek. "You're welcome, sweetheart." Alexander watched, face tightening, his jaw flexing in anger. But beneath the surface was something else. Something unsettled, something familiar. That night, as Ruth cleaned the study, she paused at the family portrait above the fireplace. Alexander, his late wife, and a baby in his arms. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached out, fingertips brushing the glass. "Time flies," she whispered to the empty room. Too fast. Behind her, the butler appeared in the doorway, watching her closely. "You shouldn't linger here," he warned quietly. Ruth wiped a tear before turning away. "Some things can't be cleaned away, Mr. Harris, not even with all the money in the world." And as she walked out, the butler's uneasy gaze followed her, because he recognized that look on her face. It was the look of someone who knew more than she should. 2 weeks passed, but Alexander Crawford couldn't shake that image. His son hugging the maid like she was family. It irritated him in ways he couldn't explain. He was a man who controlled everything. Meetings, markets, marriages. Yet lately, the one thing slipping from his grasp was his son's heart. One morning, as Alexander sat at the breakfast table reading stock reports, he heard it again, that small voice that disarmed him every time. "Daddy, can Annie Ruth eat breakfast with us today?" The spoon froze in his hand. He looked up slowly. "What did you just call her?" Ethan blinked, smiling innocently. "Annie Ruth. She tells me stories before bed sometimes." The glass in Alexander's hand cracked. "She what?" The butler, Mr. Harris, cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, Miss Daniels has been very kind to the boy while you've been traveling." Alexander stood abruptly. "Get her. Now." Moments later, Ruth appeared in the doorway, still in her uniform, clutching a folded towel. She looked calm, though her hands betrayed a faint tremor. "Mr. Crawford," she said softly. He pointed at her. "You've crossed a line. You were hired to clean, not to play mother to my son." "I didn't mean to." "Then what did you mean, Miss Daniels?" His tone was cutting, cold. "Because my son doesn't call the staff Annie." Ruth took a slow breath. "Ethan talks to me when you're busy, sir. He misses his mother." That struck deep. His late wife, Clara, had died 3 years ago in a car accident. Alexander had never talked about her, not to his son, not to anyone. He stepped closer, voice low. "Don't mention my wife again." Ruth didn't flinch. "Then maybe you should, before your son forgets what warmth feels like." For a long moment, neither moved. Then Alexander turned away, fists clenched, veins visible on his wrist. "You're finished here," he said quietly. "Collect your things by morning." Ethan gasped. "Daddy, no." He ran to Ruth, holding her hand tight. "Don't make her go." Ruth knelt, forcing a soft smile. "It's all right, Sweetheart, some things just aren't meant to stay. Alexander watched, his chest tight with something he couldn't name, because as he looked at the way Ruth's eyes softened toward his son, and the way Ethan clung to her, something buried deep inside him whispered a truth he didn't want to believe. She wasn't just another maid. She knew his family. Ruth packed her things in silence. That night, a few worn clothes, her Bible, and a single photo wrapped in a handkerchief. Her hands trembled as she folded her uniform one last time. She paused by the nursery door where Ethan slept, his little face calm, his small fingers clutching the blanket she had tucked around him every night for 2 months. She smiled sadly. "Sleep well, baby," she whispered. "You won't even remember me." But Ethan did remember. He woke up early the next morning to the sound of wheels on tile. Ruth's suitcase. "Ruth," he cried, running down the stairs barefoot. She froze mid-step, tears filling her eyes. "Go back to bed. Sweetheart, Daddy said you're leaving." She knelt and hugged him tight, whispering, "You'll be fine. You've got a big heart, Ethan. Don't let anyone make it small." He buried his face in her shoulder. "Promise you'll come back." Ruth hesitated, then pressed her hand gently to his cheek. "One day," she said softly, "when it's time." The butler, Mr. Harris, stood quietly in the corner, eyes wet. He'd seen many employees come and go, but none who'd left the house quieter than Ruth Daniels. By noon, she was gone. Alexander didn't come downstairs until evening. The house felt emptier, colder somehow. Ethan refused to eat, hiding in his room. The silence nagged at Alexander's chest like guilt he didn't want to feel. He went to his office, poured himself a drink, and tried to drown it in paperwork, but when he opened his desk drawer to grab a pen, something unusual caught his eye, a thin envelope wedged beneath the files. Curious, he pulled it out. It was old, yellowed, the paper soft from time. Inside was a single photo. Alexander froze. It was a picture of his late wife, Clara, sitting on a porch, young, laughing, with her arm around a teenage girl, a dark-skinned girl with bright eyes and the same small dimple Ruth had when she smiled. On the back, written in Clara's handwriting, were the words, "My sister Ruth, the best heart I ever knew." The glass slipped from Alexander's hand, shattering against the floor. He stumbled back, heart racing, whispering, "Sister." Suddenly, every look, every gesture, every moment between Ruth and his son made horrifying, beautiful sense. Ruth wasn't just the maid. She was family. Alexander couldn't think straight. He sat there in his study, the photo trembling in his hand, the world tilting beneath him. Clara's sister. The words echoed over and over. His wife had never mentioned a sister, never even hinted at family beyond her parents, who had passed years before. But the evidence was right there in front of him. Ruth's eyes, that same dimple, that same quiet kindness he'd seen it 1,000 times before. In Clara, he called out sharply, "Harris, get in here now." The butler hurried in, startled by the tone. "Yes, sir." Alexander shoved the photo forward. "Explain this. How long have you known?" Harris hesitated, his face pale. "Sir, how long?" Alexander demanded. Harris sighed, his shoulders sagging. "Since the day she was hired." The room went still. Alexander's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. "You knew she was Clara's sister, and you said nothing." "I promised her, sir," Harris said quietly. "Miss Ruth begged me not to tell you. She wanted to earn this job, not be given it because of blood." Alexander's breath caught. "Why hide? Why not just come to me?" Harris's eyes softened. "Because she thought you hated her." "Sir." Alexander blinked. "Hated her? I didn't even know her." The butler stepped closer. "Oh, you did. Years ago, before you married Miss Clara, there was an incident." He hesitated. "You and Clara had a fight over your company's hiring policies. She said you turned down a brilliant scholarship applicant because she didn't fit your image. That applicant was Ruth Daniels, Clara's sister. You never knew her name because Clara never told you." Alexander's chest went hollow. He sank into his chair. "Dear God," Harris continued, his voice thick with guilt. "After Clara's death, Ruth wanted to see Ethan. she said she couldn't bear to lose every piece of her sister. So, she came here under her maiden name. She never asked for your forgiveness, she just wanted to love your boy. Alexander pressed his palms to his face, shame flooding through him. My wife's sister, he whispered, and I fired her like a stranger. Harris placed the photo on the desk gently. She left town this morning. If you hurry, you might still catch her bus. Alexander looked up, eyes burning. Where to? Harris met his gaze. Back to where she started. Sir, the neighborhood you once said wasn't good enough for your family. For the first time in years, the billionaire didn't care about pride, power, or image. He just grabbed his keys and ran. The Bentley looked completely out of place on that cracked, uneven road. The air smelled of rain and fried food, and faded murals lined the walls of small shops. The neighborhood Clara had once called the heart of her home. Alexander hadn't been here in years. Maybe ever. He'd always sent drivers or assistants when Clara wanted to visit. Now he was the one searching. Desperate. Humbled. Out of breath for the first time in his life. Children played in the street and stared as his luxury car rolled by. People turned away when they recognized his face. They knew who he was. The rich man who had once called their area unsafe. He slowed near the bus stop. And that's when he saw her. Ruth sat on the bench with a single suitcase by her side. The bus was minutes away. Her hands rested in her lap. Fingers curled around her Bible. She looked peaceful. Heartbreakingly so. Alexander parked and stepped out. The world seemed to pause. The street noise faded until all he could hear was his own heartbeat. Ruth. He called out. She looked up, startled. For a second, disbelief flickered in her eyes. Then her shoulders stiffened. Mr. Crawford, she said, standing quickly. You shouldn't be here. He walked closer. I found the picture. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. Why didn't you tell me who you were? He asked quietly, her eyes filled with pain. Because it wouldn't have mattered. You made it clear years ago that people like me didn't belong in your world. Alexander's chest tightened. That was before you married my sister, Ruth said sharply. Before you built a life with her, never knowing she had a sister who loved her more than anything. Clara didn't tell you because she knew you'd look at me the same way you looked at every woman who worked in your hotels. As someone beneath you. He flinched. You think I wouldn't have cared? Ruth shook her head. You didn't care when you denied my scholarship. That was me, Mr. Crawford, the girl your company rejected. I spent years trying to prove I wasn't a mistake. Alexander's breath caught. He remembered the report, the one applicant Clara had argued for. Brilliant, determined, rejected by him personally. Ruth. He whispered, I'm sorry. She smiled sadly, tears rolling down her cheeks. It's too late for sorry. But it's not too late for Ethan. The bus hissed as it pulled to a stop. She picked up her bag, her eyes soft but distant. Tell him I love him, she said quietly, and that his aunt kept her promise. Then she stepped onto the bus. Alexander stood there, rain beginning to fall, watching it drive away. And for the first time in years, the man who had everything felt completely alone. The rain hadn't stopped by the time Alexander returned to the mansion. He walked through the silent halls like a ghost haunting his own kingdom, rooms filled with luxury but no warmth, portraits of a family he'd never truly understood. His footsteps echoed until he found himself standing before the old study, Clara's room. He hadn't entered it since she died. His hand hesitated on the doorknob, then turned it slowly. Dust floated in the golden lamplight. The faint smell of her perfume, lilac and rain, still lingered. Her writing desk sat in the corner, untouched since the funeral. He sank into her old chair, the wood creaking softly beneath his weight. As he opened a drawer, stacks of envelopes spilled out, each one addressed to him, but none ever sent. His chest tightened. The first was dated the year before she died. He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was gentle, graceful. Clara's voice whispered off the page. Alex, I wish you could see Ruth the way I do. She's more than my sister. She's my anchor. When I was sick, she came every night, even when you told her not to. She loves Ethan like her own. Please, if anything ever happens to me, promise you won't shut her out. His hand trembled. He opened another. You're so focused on building empires that you forget people don't live inside skyscrapers. They live inside love. Ruth reminded me what home feels like. You might not understand now, but one day you'll need her more than you think. Tears blurred the words. For the first time in years, Alexander Crawford wept. Not the sharp, angry tears of pride, but the deep, quiet ones that came from a heart breaking open. He realized he hadn't just lost Clara. He'd buried her sister alive with his arrogance. He turned toward the window, where the rain streaked like ink down the glass. I failed both of you, he whispered. Then he stood abruptly, wiping his face. No more running. He called for Harris. Get the car ready. The butler hesitated. Sir, where to? Alexander looked up, his voice steady, eyes burning with determination. To bring my family home. As the engine roared to life in the driveway, the storm outside began to ease, as if the world itself was ready to see what redemption looked like when a man finally chose love over pride. The next morning, the sun rose slow and golden over the small town Ruth had returned to. She sat outside a modest little church, her suitcase by her feet, humming an old gospel tune. Children walked by on their way to school, waving. She waved back with that same gentle smile, the one that had made Ethan feel safe, and that Alexander used to mistake for servitude. A black car pulled up quietly by the curb. The driver stepped out, and then Alexander Crawford appeared, not in his tailored suit this time, but in a simple gray shirt and the face of a man who'd finally seen himself for who he was. Ruth's smile faded. You shouldn't be here. He took a slow step closer. I read her letters. Ruth. Every word. Her eyes dropped to the ground. Then you know why I stayed away, he nodded. I know why you came back, too. His voice broke slightly. Clara loved you. She never stopped talking about how strong you were, how much you cared for Ethan. Ruth's eyes shimmered, but she stayed quiet. I was blind, Alexander said softly. All these years, I was proud of what I built. Hotels, deals, reputation. But the real empire was the family I ignored. Ruth folded her arms, her voice barely above a whisper. Apologies don't rebuild hearts, Mr. Crawford. He took another step closer. I don't want to rebuild them. I just want to hold them together before they break for good. Ruth's lip trembled. Why now? Because I finally realized what my son already knew, he said. Your family. For a long moment, she said nothing. The bus to the city pulled up behind her, its doors hissing open. She turned slightly, torn. And then a small voice cried out from the distance. Ruth. She turned sharply. Down the street came a tiny figure running full speed. Ethan, his arms wide, his little face bright with joy. He crashed into her knees, hugging her tight. I told you you'd come back, he said breathlessly. Ruth's heart broke open. She knelt, clutching him, tears spilling freely. I missed you so much, baby. Alexander stood behind them, watching quietly, tears in his eyes. For the first time, he didn't interrupt or control the moment. He just let love do what it was always meant to do. Heal what pride had broken. Ruth looked up finally, her hands still on Ethan's back. You really mean it. Alexander nodded. Come home, Ruth. Not as staff, as his aunt, and my sister. Ruth's voice cracked. Then let's go home. The Crawford mansion had never felt this alive. Sunlight poured through the tall windows. Laughter echoed down the halls that once carried only silence. And the smell of pancakes drifted from the kitchen where Ruth stood, wearing a floral apron instead of her old uniform. Ethan sat on the counter, giggling as she flipped another one, his face dusted with flour. Too much sugar. Andy Ruth, he teased. She laughed, that same warm, musical sound that used to echo only in other people's homes. Sweetness never hurt anyone. Baby, in the doorway, Alexander watched quietly. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a monument to wealth. It felt like a home. He cleared his throat softly, and both turned. Ruth looked unsure, still not used to being treated as family, not staff. I have somewhere to be today, Alexander said gently. Both of you should come with me. An hour later, they stood in the ballroom of his flagship hotel downtown. Reporters filled the room, Cameras flashing. On stage, Alexander stepped to the microphone, his usual corporate confidence replaced by quiet sincerity. "Good afternoon," he began. "I've spent most of my life building an empire, but somewhere along the way, I forgot that an empire means nothing if it has no heart." Whispers filled the crowd. He turned slightly, motioning toward Ruth and Ethan. "This woman," he said, voice thick with emotion, "came into my home as a maid. But she gave my son what all my money never could: love, patience, and family. I once treated her like she didn't belong here, until I found out she belonged here more than anyone." Ruth's eyes filled with tears as the cameras clicked. "She's not my employee," Alexander continued, his voice breaking slightly. "She's my sister, the sister of my late wife, Clara, and from today on, she carries my family name, Daniels Crawford, as she always should have." Applause thundered through the room. Ethan ran to Ruth, hugging her leg, beaming up at her. "I told you Daddy wouldn't stay mad forever." Ruth smiled, tears running freely now. "Your daddy finally learned what your mama already knew," as the crowd cheered. Alexander looked up, for the first time in years. No guilt, no anger, only peace, because in that moment, he knew Clara was somewhere smiling too, proud of the family she'd left behind, finally whole again. Moral: family isn't who shares your blood, it's who shares your heart. Forgiveness doesn't change the past, but it can heal the pieces pride once broke.